again, thank you very much for the organization of this industry sponsored symposium by BAXTER on a special topic, which is digital transformation in intensive care and what's next. We're really pleased to welcome our remote audience, and I've been informed that today we have 135 people connected. Hopefully the other guys, oh, thank you, so sweet. The other guys will probably reach us in the room as soon as they finish the lunch, but we have to stick to the time and begin. Now, I want to tell you that these topics that BAXTER have chosen to debate are very timely and very important. In our own department, which is a critical care nephrology connection, as you know, we started in the 2002 with the quality assurance program and continuous quality improvement program. The first aspect was we don't need it. And then the direction of the hospital wanted us to lead the process for the hospital, so we did it. And we started measuring a few quality parameters. And we got depressed. We got really depressed because we thought we were good and we were not really good. The truth is that you know only what you measure, and you can improve only what you measure. Now, there are several, let's say, actions you can make, and it is a living program. Every year you improve, every year you find more details. And even when you think you are at the good point, you discover new problem to correct and so on. But this is part of the continuous quality improvement program. And I think that what we learned is not to live with this quality plan as an imposition, but rather to live in the quality program. And now our collaborators are really excited and part of the continuous improvement. And you can perceive this from outside. We were able to infect, let's say, other departments, and the entire hospital is now moving towards this. One of the issues, however, is in order to improve something, you have to know what you're doing, you have to measure what you're doing, and the problem of transformation into digital medicine has been not without suffering for many years. I remember we began late, approximately around 2000, 2002, with a computerized system. Before, I had the experience in the United States in several different groups where I was working, Beth Israel Medical Center in New York, Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, University of Virginia. They had experienced what was called an expensive failure. Expensive failure was a program of computerization that, however, was often underfunded or not well planned, or there was a top-down program instead of having a bottom-up analysis, and the results were not what were expected, and the systems were rejected. So money was not enough, but that money was definitely wasted. So we waited until computers were more available. I think one step interesting was when the nurses started to have the children at school using the computers, because they were forced to start using the computer. And of course, now we have the Z generation, the millennials and everything. But one of the important things is, okay, fine. Now we know that we can measure data, we can collect data. First, how do we collect the data? If you expect data to be collected by hand, the number of mistakes, the number of, let's say, missing fields in the database, it's incredible. So you need to have a kind of automatic data collection. But then the point is, fantastic. What do you do with data? Who is going to analyze the data? Very often, we were so excited, a little bit taking the attitude of Japanese people, we measure everything. And then we were flooded by amount of data, and we didn't know what to do with this. So we learned how to design a system where we first want to know what we want to do, and then we collect the right data in order to do this. It is also true that sometimes this approach limits the number of data you collect, and sometimes if you do want to do a post hoc analysis, you are frustrated because you don't know, you don't have the data, the single data that should have been collected and was not collected. Nevertheless, it is an approach that pays a lot. And we learned to use data collected for data analysis and to start a process of improvement. But we also learned to do registries, to do what today we call often silica trial. There are trials based on probably less data collected prospectively, but much more data collected in real time that represent the real world. And so the other step is, why not having an algorithm to decide for you what is good, what is bad, how useful the data are? And I must say that a few years ago in Canada, we did an ADKI meeting on digital health, but we were just at the beginning. The real quantum leap was in San Diego this year in spring, where we did a study, an ADKI meeting, a consensus conference on the use of digital health. And we are developing a manuscript on recommendations and what the advantages are. We don't want to speak about artificial intelligence because we don't like it. We want to speak about enhanced human intelligence. By the way, I had a fantastic conversation with Federico Fagin, who is an Italian guy from Vicenza. He just invented the microchip. So every computer in the world works because he made this invention. He was at the Intel at that time, then he founded his own company. And we discussed about the possibility of computer to have a consciousness. No way. So if you expect computers to give you the answers, no. But you can put the right questions in, and you may have suggestions. And I think that this is the perfect, let's say, biotechnological concordance between the human intelligence and the so-called artificial intelligence, which is not an intelligence. So today, I'm particularly grateful to Baxter because I think since we developed, I mean we really developed the Prisma machine, and together we moved towards the development of the PrismaFlex machine, and finally the Prismax machine was developed. We always had the impression that we needed to measure what we were basically doing in order to be able to have a backflux of information and action that in general we'll call biofeedback, but it's a bundle of actions that is made based on a specific approach. One last comment, and it is, people are often afraid to do simple data collection systems like making a checklist. If a pilot of British Airways, Lufthansa, Alitalia, whatever, with 40,000 hours of flight, still to take off from Venice to go to Frankfurt, makes a checklist, and there is a second pilot that controls that checklist, why not doing this while we do CRRT? So I think these few comments, mitigated by my cake lunch probably, and the fall in sugar level in my brain, but probably coming from experience, allowed us to introduce the today's topic. And we have the pleasure to have Massimiliano Greco from the Humanitas Hospital in Milan, who will speak about big data. For us, our generation, big data were big rooms with a lot of dust in big amount of papers. For you, big data is something different, but you have to tell me if this has any impact on your decision-making process. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and in this great congress. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm part of my research. I'm also working in Humanitas University. Is indeed on data science and big data. So let me see, maybe with this. No. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So these are my conflict of interest. And when we want to talk about big data, I completely agree with your introduction, Mr. Chairman. And we are indeed between a gap on what we had in the expectation we had in the last year, where, for example, I take this sentence from a paper of 2020. They foresee that artificial intelligence and machine learning had the potential to manage and treat a wide variety of conditions. But then in the more recent, for example, editorial in another setting, which is neurocritical care, the editorial says we have a lot of blah, 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 a lot of talking, but then we are not able to make a lot of conclusions. So I start from here. However, what I want to say at the beginning is that I want to separate big data from artificial intelligence and machine learning. So all of these are inside a big umbrella term, which is data science. But big data are something separated from that, from the artificial intelligence side. So we have artificial intelligence, including computer vision or natural language processing or machine learning and so on. But then we have big data, and big data are much more common. We have that in our phones, for example. We have that all around us, and they are characterized by what? By the volume. Indeed, they are big data, by the velocity or the rate in which they are collected, and by the variety in which we can collect them. And indeed, we want to talk about big data in critical ill because we are surrounded by data. We have data from the monitor, multiparametric monitor. We have data from the waveforms on there, arterial blood pressure, EKG, and so on. And then we have also data from the enteral feeds, the respirators, and so on. So it's something like being surrounded by data, like in the movie Matrix. We have data all around us. And I take this article from 2018 from Nelson Sanchez Pinto, which lists all the categories of big data we can have in the ICU. For example, we already talked about waveform analysis, waveform and EKG, but we can also talk about imaging, laboratory data, biomarkers, but also again about natural language processing, which is something that is not we are not yet able to analyze, but maybe in 5 or 10 years it will be something that the computer will help us to analyze. So to take what doctor says in natural language and to transfer that in something that can be used for analysis. And then I came to the picture you were referring before. These are also big data, a large archive of paper. And if we stroll to the archive, between the papers, we are surrounded again by big data. But the problem with big data is, are they accessible? So when we have this, when we add this paper archive, and also now when we want to think about big data, we want to be sure that data are accessible. So if several years ago what we have to do is to take data from the monitor, put them on the paper, so write down the diuresis, the blood pressure, and then the paper went to the archive, and then somebody, if you want to analyze the data, somebody went to the archive, took the data, put that in an Excel form, and then we do the analysis on that. So there is a three times possibility of errors and the duplication of data and so on. Now we have a lot of clinical data that are automatically collected, maybe directly from the machines, and which are stored into the system. But we want to access them. So the idea is that we are in between a revolution, a Copernican revolution, in which on one side we are coming from a period in which the health record was based on paper and was used to collect information to be shared within the team on a single patient. But now we are moving toward a new period in which data are used not only for this, also for this, but also to measure, as we were saying before, some outcomes, to benchmark us according to the guidelines and to other centers, and this is the idea of registry and so on, and also to predict outcomes, but also deterioration. And these are the main changes that we are facing now. And indeed, I want to mention the three largest available data sources that we have on critical ill patients online, and which are the MIMIC4, the EICU, and the UMC. And these are actually two are from America, from the United States. They are very large, collecting between 60,000 patients and 200,000 patients. And now they are available for free, and a lot of papers, medical papers, are being published on this data, which are available not only for the teams, but also for the whole world to study this type of data. There is also the UMC database, which is from Europe, the only one from Europe. And this is an example of what we can see in the EICU database from Philips Electronic Health Record in America. And you can see that this is how big data actually looks. So they have, for example, I have underlined the nurse charting data with about 150 million rows for some columns. And so we have a mine of data which can be used, but we need to know how to do it. And this is now, the next step, I will show you what can be an idea to start to use that. This is the article that was by Komorowski, talking about artificial intelligence, and it was applied to, again, the MIMIC4 database, one of the three databases I just mentioned. But this is artificial intelligence. So this is another thing. It is an evolution where we want to see what machines do to interpret the data. But we can do something more simple than this. We can use data to support our decision making. We can use that to improve our clinical outcomes, to improve quality, and to improve our efficiency in the process. So to reduce the cost and to improve the value in care. Because indeed, in every clinical process, what we have is that if we want to do an improvement whatsoever, we need to have a target, which can be the KPI, the key indicator for quality. We need to have a measure of the initial level. We need to do a process, something, an intervention, and then we have to measure where we arrived. But I will not go too deep in this because the next relation is exactly about the quality. So there are a lot of things that we can do on our data from the electronic health record. For example, in this case, we did something very simple. We don't need to go through necessarily advanced artificial intelligence technology. For example, in this paper, our group we wanted to know whether there was an impact in vital signs in the whole hospital. These are not ICU data. These are electronic health record data from the whole hospital, from my hospital Humanitas. And we want to know whether COVID impacted the standard medical wards according to the risk of vital signs problems, for example, severe desaturation. And if you look here, we have a heat maps, and every square is actually a different ward. And you can see that, for example, the square here below, I don't know if you see the mouse. No, you don't, I will use it. The square here below, the number 6, this is a ward, a medical ward, and it increased to, in the number of patients, so the more larger the square, the more higher the number of admitted patients in the same unit of time, with a larger number of desaturation. So why do all this? Because we are able to, this is just research, not applied to clinic, but we are able to say to the hospital administration, listen, in this ward things are deteriorating due to the more higher number of the saturation, please send more nurses and more doctors there according to what we did before, because we have a problem in vital signs in these patients. They are more severe. And of course, the other things I want to mention very briefly is that we used a lot of data to decide to take the decision, not me, but the coordinating in Lombardy ICU network, the coordinating center. They used a lot of data from the network of ICU in Lombardy to take decision about opening new beds in COVID surge waves. So we used a lot of this data. And here in this paper I'm just presenting, after 1 year we decided to look at this data again and see how a machine learning system were performing comparing to a standard statistical technique. And we see that while this is only research, we didn't use this in the upsurge phase of the COVID-19. We did that 1 year later, so the decisions were taken by men, not by machines, but more or less the machine learning system actually reached a similar value of performance compared to humans. And I go back now to the intensive care unit and to the electronic health record. Here I have some example of what I have done for a thesis recently, and I hope to publish soon, if possible. Is we looked at the incidence of AKI only in our COVID patients, only looking at electronic health record data. So we took all the data from the COVID patients in the electronic health record in the hospital and in intensive care, and see the incidence according to what? The level of creatinine, the critical criteria, level of creatinine, and urinary output, because my hospital has vital signs, including urinary output, also in the wards. And we were able to see the incidence of AKI in what? In the difference between ICU, with a very high percentage of AKI, and general ward, with still a high percentage, but something lower, and also the difference between the several waves. So we have a peak of AKI in the ICU in the second wave, and something less in the other waves. But the incidence actually didn't change in our center according to the different waves. The mortality did, because it was lower and lower according to the waves, also in AKI patients, but the AKI incidence didn't change. And you can see that here on the right, the ICU patients, I have lost one of the column. I don't have the first wave. Why? Because my intensive care in the first wave was still basing most of the data on paper, and so we don't have the data. We started on the second wave. And then again, another things that I want to show, and here I'm still talking about very simple things, so it's just incidence, prevalence, and in this case, like the pattern of the disease over time. Here, what I've did is to describe, according to the clinical criteria, what happens to the patients arriving with AKI stage 2 and stage 3 with COVID, according to the electronic health record. So we can see the evolution of patients that are arriving with AKI stage 2 or stage 3. Some of these actually recover immediately. Some of these maybe were just didn't have it. Maybe they were just we are overestimating some of these, because we don't have. We are doing an estimation based on clinical data collected in an electronic record, but this type of error is actually the same type of error that the doctor is facing in clinical practice. So if I look at the uresis in the electronic health record, this is the same situation. So this is just to say that one of the ways in which I can use the data is to look at simple things, evolution of over time, patterns, and incidence, and so on. And this is something in which I am using my intelligence more than artificial intelligence to make some prediction. And then we can also use, of course, our data to make predictions on outcomes or to anticipate deterioration. For example, in this known work from Marin Fleschet of some years ago, they were able to design a possibility of predicting AKI and to compare that with biomarkers according to 3 different models, baseline models on baseline characteristic of patients, admission models in ICU, and day 1 models. Of course, this has not been validated so much in other centers, but the idea is that with our data, we are also able to do some predictions about our patients and to foresee their deteriorations. So these are the advantages that I have just shown in the ICU. Now I want to to concentrate a little more on the possibility of using this data to improve the quality. So I prepared this data just for this presentation. I went to the electronic health record again, and I see for example, I started to ask myself, how can I use my data in the electronic health record to see something that is useful for quality? So I don't have all the data in my electronic health record, but I have some of these. So for example, here I just represent the difference in CRT duration between our COVID center, which is the one in the picture there, and CRT done in the other part of the hospital, the standard ICU. This is not research, it is just quality in my center. With this data, I can make some conclusion. And then again, I can look at what were, for example, the daily variations in renal replacement therapy fluid removal. So we can see these below are the hours of the day, from midnight to midnight again. And maybe we can spot some difference. I didn't find any difference there. But the idea is that we can use that to spot maybe some problems in different times of the days, or for example, in different times of the week. Here I have the same graphs with fluid removal over several days of the week, and again over the time. Maybe there is a problem in the weekend, we are understaffing, people is tired. We need to know that. We can look at the data day by day and hour by hour and see that. Of course, I don't have all the data, and this is a problem of we were trying to solve in our electronic record. We have also other instruments to collect the data. For example, a registry, as I mentioned before. This is the global RRT registry, and I want to mention Gianluca Villa and Silvia De Rosa for the registry. And for example, how can we use the data from the registry, which is something that we want to collect? Why we want to collect data in the registry? Because we want to benchmark with other centers, and because we want to benchmark according to guidelines. For example, in this case, the recommended renal replacement therapy dose. So what I did, again, just for this presentation, is to take some data from our center in the registry, because I didn't have this data in our electronic health record, and see what was the variation in daily dose for some patients in the COVID ICU compared to what was the standard. And I see that there are not so much patients, about 10 patients, but there is probably some problems with the maybe we are doing maybe we have to adjust a little the dose, but this is again real life, so this is our data, and we can also spot how patients and single patients evolved over days during the CRRT. What is the problem? And I go to the last part of the presentation. What is the problem in doing this analysis? Because here we have the to do this, we had several data, several software to use this data. I will go swiftly to that. We can use something different, which is automatic dashboard. If you don't want to analyze the data, you don't need to learn all the R Python code, but you can just ask somebody to build for you an automatic dashboard. For example, this is our automatic dashboard for several data. And this is something that we can use to improve the quality of care in CRRT. Indeed, I just want to mention to end that there are some techniques that we can use to collect this data. For example, one of the problems in my data was that we didn't have all these mode alarms, anticoagulation system that we have on the CRRT machines. But for example, there are some projects, including the TrueView project, in which these data are automatically sent to the electronic health record, or they can also be sent to a dashboard. Which is simple, something accessible for everybody without doing other analysis, to do what? To measure our KPI. and so to be able to improve our practice with these direct variations. And so, well, I just skip this. I will just go to the end. The idea behind this possibility is that more and more in the future we will be able to connect and collect machines, including the CRRT, including the RRT machines, and to visualize and analyze data automatically without doing efforts. So, for example, with a dashboard. And the Treview, for example, project has both the possibility. And then this will be used to improve our data. I will just skip this on the systemic limitation, and we'll go directly to the conclusion, which are these. And we are sitting indeed on a mine of big data, and I hope I have convinced you of that. And we are in the middle of a Copernican revolution. And we can use this data to improve our practice, clinical outcome, and quality of care, and so on. And if you don't have the staff and the people to do all the analysis, don't worry. Start in any case to use the data, asking to your hospital to do some dashboard and to visualize your KPI on the dashboard to be able to improve your practice, and that's all.
Thank you very much. Please sit near me, and Vincenzo.
Qui c'è un telefono. Thanks, Claudio, and thanks to BAXTER for the kind invitation. So my quality improvements during renal replacement therapy. This is the landmark National Confidential Inquiry into Patient Outcome and Death, substantially saying that only the 50% of hospitalized patients dying with AKI received a good care. And this may be a problem, and the evaluation of the quality of medical care started about 50 years ago with this triad of structure, process, and outcome to evaluate the quality of care proposed on the New England Journal of Medicine by Donamedian. And what means the identification of these key performance indicators, KPI or KI. So structures means the settings, the qualification of providers, and the administrative system for which care takes place. The process as the components of care delivered, and the outcome, recovery, restoration of function, and survival. And the first problem in the AKI and CRT, and that we have a clinical spectrum, so we have a syndrome with different causes, and we all know how many different causes of AKI and in the context of a multiple organ failure. And the other problem is the so-called anarchy of the renal replacement therapy strategies that we have to face. So we have a generation of very big data from these two aspects, and you can see here, which in my mind is the complexity of renal replacement therapy for AKI with the different variables that lead to the final prescription, and that we should periodically assess what we are delivering in terms of what we wanted to prescribe. So the question here, so how to reach the goal, to reach this best quality in RT, and the quality management or the quality improvement, we have these three questions. Why? Why is the standardization of CRT practice to improve patient care, so efficiency and safety? How? Automatic electronic health records, as we already saying, and what? The quality indicators. And I talk about these quality indicators a little bit because this is the search in the literature for the quality indicators mainly from the University of Alberta. Work. You can see here the structure, care processes, and outcomes QI for kidney replacement therapy. And the most commonly mentioned, I will focus on the identification of this QI through a Delphi method, and also through the ATKI consensus conference that wanted to forward the methodology for integrating these potential QIs into the clinical practice and propose an agenda for research to evaluate these QI, once again divided in outcome, structure, and process. The core question for quality measure in acute renal replacement therapy are these four. How should the quality of acute RRT be monitored, evaluated, and reported? And what are the minimum structure, process and outcome indicators that should be implemented for the provision of acute renal replacement therapy. So for systematic review, the Delphi process, as reported in the ATKI meeting, we can identify some structural QI, such as filter life, some QI related to the process care, delivery dose, fluid management, small solid clearance, or QI related to patient outcomes, such as adverse effects or catheter dysfunction. If you focus on some structure, in particular, we have to talk about the training. This is a very important topic in terms of optimizing continuous renal replacement therapy. So we want to create a team strategy. The success of a renal replacement therapy session is extremely dependent on the team's experience. And the organization, the training, and the evaluation and protocols are the key point for this efficiency. The training should be repeated, including basic principle and more advanced concept, and probably simulation, as we can see, may be something to be more used in the future. So we have a complex approach, but we can see by this paper for Olivier Johan-Bouillot the difference between a trained team or a not trained team. So the complete evaluation report with a focus on the comparison of two different ICU, one with minimal training and low experience on citrate anticoagulation, and the other well established with therapy for several years. So you can see the difference between the bad and the good lifespan. The same thing for the arrival of new nurses, of new personnel. So if you have a trained personnel, you have less problem, you have less loss of filter, less downtime. As already been observed, we can have a higher dose of dialysis and less variability between with a trained team. And this leads me to talk a little bit about the simulation in training. We have in our center, in our university, a simulation center called SimNova. And the vision is to pursue excellence and innovation in research and teaching. And the use of these kind of innovative teaching methodologies, such as e-learning, is something that should become a strategic point for the formation and the efficiency in teaching. And so in our mind, the future perspective maybe to train area by trying to cover disciplines that still struggle to integrate simulation and the use of advanced technology to traditional training, such as dialysis technique and simulation in nephrology. From training, let me see something about another important topic, that is the standardization of protocols. This is one of the most used examples, that is the citrate anticoagulation. And you can see that we have different targets, looking at citrate dose, blood flow, the filtration fraction, if you are using hemofiltration thing. So there is the importance to standardize protocol, to know when to do, how to do things, and when also to create some alarms from the nurse to the doctors when your protocol is running bad. Let me see another example in the anticoagulation setting of improving the performance of kidney replacement therapy. This is the experience of my center in using heparin anticoagulation for prolonged and intermittent renal replacement therapy. And you can see in about more than 300 patients, the majority of patients you don't have coagulation or clotting of the circuit, but we have some patients, the so-called frequent clotters. This is mainly due to the presence of sepsis and to low levels of antithrombin that should be controlled, measured, and supplemented. And so the development of a protocol in which with further step you can increase perdilution, decrease impaired duration without hemodynamic alteration, optimize the heparin dose, administrating the antithrombin, use some telemonitoring system, so telemedicine approach to follow up the dialysis system may improve your RRT. So basically we have this quality assurance system. I want to go also to take some time into the QI related to process. This is another important. We dealt about structure. What about the process? And the process take us to talk about what we can call precision medicine in renal replacement therapy. And one of the most important goals is surely fluid management through renal replacement therapy. We have different aspects. The first is related once again to circuit integrity, so to anticoagulation. And we should know that the fluids administered for the circuit patency and anticoagulation need to be included in the determining the net fluid balance. If you use a pre-dilution, fluid administration increases the filter life, but we have a modulation of filtration fraction. So we have to consider all these things in terms of precision and RT in the fluid management. The second aspect of fluid management is plasma composition, because we know that we have commercially available dialysate and replacement solution containing different concentration of electrolytes. And so this is something that we should also consider in the pathway of precision renal replacement therapy. The typical example of hypophosphatemia that we know is correlated with an increase in mortality in the ICU. And so today we have for the industry the chance to use some buffer containing phosphate, and so trying to avoid this hypophosphatemia. And the other things is related to fluid management and the ultrafiltration rate. This is another important topic for precision RRT. We know from the literature we have some studies looking at the association between net ultrafiltration rate and renal recovery among critical ER patients. And from registry, once again, we know that the net ultrafiltration prescription is very different among centers in Europe. So once again, in terms of precision medicine in kidney replacement therapy, this is another key point to consider. Fluids, but also the one other important topic is the dialysis dose. And we have more than 60 years that passes since the first successful clinical application in dialysis in patients with acute kidney injury was performed, and we have still two questions. So when to start and which is the appropriate dose. So we need help for this, and this is the landmark study of our chairman 22 years ago, published on Lancet, to see the importance of dose. And these studies were very important, coming to the IWAR study of Patrick Honoré, because we identified in terms of precision kidney replacement therapy, which is the dose that we recommend in terms of a weekly KT over V or the administration of effluent volume, as we know, about 20-25 milliliter per kilo per hour. And this is another problem, because we know the difference between what we call prescribed and delivered dose. So once again, we had to measure this, because many centers do not measure this aspect. And this is the second aspect for me, very important for the so-called precision medicine. And the third is, yes, but the dose of what? Because we are still interested in urea, sure, but this is something that comes from chronic dialysis, because the same thing in terms of uremic toxins, and so once again of precision medicine, can be translated to the acute setting. We have today some fibers, some membranes that are called high-performance membranes that are used in the chronic as well in the acute setting. So this is another important topic, to increase the removal of specific mediator. We have talked a lot about the removal of specific mediator during the Congress. So this is another important point, using and trying to use in the best way this high-performance membrane. So coming to the end, we have the current CRT technology presents significant limitation, but we have an enormous amount of data, as we have already seen in the previous presentation. And I want to underline, I will also underline the importance of data registry. This is the CRT net proposed by Stuart Goldstein and others, as well as the already presented global RRT registry by Gianluca Villa and colleagues. So what we should do is pass through this sporadic, incomplete data and non-integrated into clinical workflow collection, so without any kind of alteration of the clinical decision making, to a dynamic, multimodal, integrated collection of data, not only coming from the machine, from the kidney replacement therapy, but from all the possible data collection in the ICU. And I want also to underline that the optimizing outcome of renal replacement therapy is part of what is called the AKI quality of care in continuity. That means also the AKI prevention and management, so the AKI without the need of renal replacement therapy, and in particular the follow-up of AKI toward chronic kidney disease. This is another field in which we lack many data to see what happens at patients with AKI after hospitalization. And I want to conclude with this slide. These are the 6 steps for providing optimal acute RRT. I think that you should think about these 6 points. Close collaboration between the critical care medicine and nephrology. Define the primary goal of RRT daily, fluid removal, solute clearance, and so on. Keep CRT running. Review appropriateness, medication dosing daily, the problem of ensure appropriate nutrition, and last, avoid the RRT-related complication. Failures anywhere along this complex tree leads to suboptimal renal replacement therapy. Failure to achieve the individualized goals of therapy and can negatively impact patients' outcome. But the most important thing, as remembered by our chairman in introduction, we have to measure many things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, we have a question from the remote audience, whether we have implemented in any ICU in Italy a program of NHS called Productive Ward, which complements being the organization of CQI. I don't think this has been ever implemented in Italy.
I'm not aware of this.
The answer to our remote colleague is no. And unfortunately, we have no time to discuss, but it would have been interesting to have much more time to talk about the help of artificial intelligence, what to do with the data, the fact that if we rely on an automatic system, once we rely on this, we have to have all the data there. Otherwise, we cannot live in a mixed situation. But I'm sure that this effort of Baxter to bring up this topic has an implication on what is the policy of the company, probably to try to manage not only the treatment, but also the patient. And I think there is a booth from Baxter. They will be happy to discuss with any of you further evolution of this approach.